Let's have a look now at how to create your offer in Partner Center. So you've set up your Partner Center account, and now you can go to partner.microsoft.com. That's where you'll see your marketplace offers. And if you go to this, you'll have the ability to create a new offer. And you have many different products listed there, but of course, we'll have a look at Business Central. Once you've created your offer and specified a name for it, you'll be landing on this page. And this is where you'll start setting up your offer. The first important decision you'll have to take is what type of package type you're deploying. There are different ways of extending Business Central capabilities. The first one is add-on app. So those are the more traditional AL packages that you're all working with. But you can also use connect apps. And those are point-to-point service connections. So usually extending Business Central functionality through web services or with data or other similar functionalities. In this presentation, we'll focus, of course, a lot on the add-on apps, but it's important to note that you have alternatives there. The next functionality that you have there, and you might have seen it in other presentations today already, is the ability to sell through Microsoft. So we have now the ability to directly monetize your app through the AppSource marketplace without building too much of your own licensing mechanisms. But for now, I'll just say no to this field, and I'll choose to define my own one. We'll go back a bit later on how to set it up. So if you specify that you do not want to sell through Microsoft, then the next choice that comes to you is what type of listing do you want to have and how do you want people to interact with it. If you choose Get It Now, your apps is then free to be used. It's also a good approach for you to have a freemium approach if you want some functionalities to be paid for. You can also specify that you want to have a free trial. Then in that case, you will have to build your own mechanisms to restrict the number of users or of transactions there. The last thing that you might be using is the Contact Me offer. And this means that the app cannot be directly installed from the AppSource marketplace on the customer environment, but the customer will have to provide some contact information, and then you will get back to them, helping them set this up. And that's usually something that we require for Connect apps, because those ones require some manual setting and are not just an AL app that we can deploy on the environment. On this tab, you'll also have the customer leads, so that's very related to what we've just discussed now around Connect app and Contact Me. This is how you will specify the service that you will use for receiving the information from your prospects on AppSource that will enter their contact information. If we move to the next tabs, you'll have some fields that impact like how your app is classified in the marketplace and how it will then be discovered by users. And you also have an app version field. This one is a version that has to match the version that you're specifying in the app.json of your app. So if you're using an add-on app, every time you update the version there, you'll also have to update that field. If we move to the next tabs, you'll have all the marketing materials to set. The first one and pretty important one is the name. Again, that has to match the name of the extension that you're uploading in the marketplace. And you have also the ability to define some other marketing materials. Everything you're specifying there will be reviewed by some validation teams, and they have some advices that we're sharing to you today. The first thing is you need to pay attention to how you're referring to Business Central. The first time we're asking you to use the explicit name for Microsoft Dynamics 365 Business Central. Later on, you can use one of the shorter versions available on screen. You're also required to provide in your offer description the list of countries and languages that your offer supports. You'll also be asked to not include any of the business programs or eligibility that you're part of, even if you're proud of them and would like to include them. And then a bit later, you'll also have the ability to set up marketing materials there that include screenshot videos and anything that can make your offer attractive for potential customers. We have a lot of guidelines online, whether they're from Business Central or from the AppSource marketplace in general. But it's important there that you are mindful of the copyrights and the trademark materials that you have. This is one of the common reasons for which submissions are refused on the marketing validation. And we know from experience that fixing those marketing materials takes time and is one of the main reasons why offers are being delayed when they go to AppSource. On the next tab, you'll have to specify which markets your app is targeting, and those are the different countries and regions for which your app will be available in Business Central. And again, this has to match the list of countries you're specifying in your offer description. Any mismatch will cause a failure of the submission. On the next tab, this is where you'll have to upload your .app files for your extension. The first entry here is the main extension, so the one that is tightly coupled to the offer. As mentioned earlier, the name and version have to match with the other fields that you've already set up, and the publisher of that extension has to match the one that you're using in Partner Center as well. You then also have the ability to specify some dependencies, some libraries here, either as a one.app file if you have only one, or as a zip that contains one or multiple ones. And it's important to note that from our point of view, one offer is one main app and its dependencies. It's not just a combination of unrelated apps. They have to be linked together. And here is an example. You could submit your main app that has that requires then 3 libraries in order to compile. But if you upload as your zip file a 4th one that is not required by the main app or any of the libraries, then it will be ignored and won't be validated by the service. Of course, if you know that some of those dependencies are already published in AppSource through different offers, then you do not have to specify them there. The service will automatically resolve them and use them for you. Next tab will be pretty fast to cover. So supplemental content. This is a tab that is pending removal, and all the information that is there are currently not used by the service. So you just need to specify some value to satisfy the UI. Some of the fields are asking you to upload a file. As long as you have a file that have the right extension, it will be fine for us. So just specify something there. You might be wondering now, if since the target release field is ignored, how do we select which are the releases of Business Central that you're targeting with your offer? We've seen from experience that current, next minor, and next major could be ambiguous, depending on what time of the release process for Microsoft we are. If a new minor or major is along the corner, or if your customer's on an older version, that might not be very obvious what this means. So we decided to replace it by the application property in the manifest of your apps. And if we take an example here with 21.0 set, it means that the app will be validated from 21.0 and higher releases until the latest one at the time of submission. This also means that your app will be available for environments on those versions. It won't be available for environments that have a lower version of Business Central. And as a side note, 30 days before the release of the next major, we are also validating against this upcoming major, because we want to push all AppSource publishers to be ready for the next major so that the customer can upgrade as soon as possible whenever they have the possibility. If you have multiple apps in your submission, then we are computing what the target release is as the maximum of the application versions for all of them. So as an example, if your main app targets application 21, but you have a library that targets application 22, then what we will resolve as the target for the submission is 22. OK, with this, we went through all the different fields in Partner Center, and you should now be ready to get it right. The next thing you'll have to do is preparing your app for AppSource. So one scenario is that you might have a PT and you've deployed on a few customers, you've been pretty successful with that, and now you'd like to expand your business by going to AppSource. There'll be a few changes that you need to do. The first thing that you might be doing is setting up a new source control repository for your app so that everything is there. But then we'll ask you to get a new app ID. And this comes from some limitations in the service. Currently, PTs and AppSource apps cannot share the same app ID. As soon as you will upload an AppSource app with that app ID, PTs using the same app ID cannot be uploaded anymore. And that might be impactful for your customers, because they might need to receive updates for that PTA, and we're receiving often support cases about it. So be mindful about it. Change your app ID when you're moving to AppSource. The next thing you'll have to do is enable AppSource scope. So you can do this from CI/CD pipelines. You can do this from VS Code using some of the settings here. We had other sessions that talked about the improvements done to the code analysis framework. So this is related to that. AppSource scope is what is used to verify that your app is meeting the requirements for the AppSource marketplace. So if you're able to pass the validation of the AppSource scope locally, you'll be pretty likely to succeed in the Partner Center as well. As part of the AppSource scope setup, you'll have to create an AppSource scope.json file, and this one has some additional configurations for the AppSource scope. For instance, the field on mandatory affixes. This is where you'll specify the affix that was registered for your publisher name. And you can also specify the list of supported countries so that AppSource scope can also verify that you have translations for all the languages supported in Business Central for those countries. And once you've done this, you'll have to start fixing diagnostics. So let's have a quick look at the changes you'll have to do to fix those diagnostics. If you have a PTE and the manifest look like this, the first thing you'll have to do is change the app ID to give your app a new identity and make sure you won't get into the problems we discussed earlier. You will have to also fill all these fields that are not mandatory for PTEs, but so that your customers can get a great experience and have privacy statements and so on. You'll have to change the ID range that you're using to match the AppSource marketplace requirement and get the one that was assigned to you. If you're not using the application property, you'll have to start doing it now because that's needed for knowing which release of Business Central you're targeting. This is not a requirement, but we highly recommend you to review your resource exposure policy. When going to AppSource, you will have a much broader audience, so you might have to think about how you want to expose and protect your intellectual property. So have a look at the resource exposure policy. And the last thing, you will have to also enable translation files. If we look now at some sample of code, so here, very basic page extension, you'll have to do some changes as well. You'll have to change the ID that you're using to match the ID range. You'll have to use affixes on all your objects. You will also have to use affixes on all the members of your page extensions objects, table extensions objects, report extensions. We will ask you also to move away from the multi-language properties, such as caption ML, to use the label ones, such as captions, so that you can use them through your translation files. And we'll also recommend you to move away from errors and messages that are just hard-coded in your code and use instead label variables so that you can also translate them with translation files. The next thing we'll ask you to do also is to think about how you want to structure your offer in terms of libraries, but also in terms of market expansion later. If you're targeting one country now, you might maybe want to target more in the future. And this has to be taken into account, especially because Microsoft apps at the moment are localized, meaning that they can have different content depending on the country regions you're targeting. This is not something that we allow for AppSource apps. That's the case for some Microsoft apps because of legacy reason, and we're working hard to fix it. And we can have an example now of how that can cause issues for you. If you have an app that you've pushed to AppSource for, let's say, Canada, and it has a mix of objects that are specific for Canada and for W1, the common localization for all countries, it will work fine on Canada, but as soon as you're trying to move to another country, some of the references will be resolved, some others will not, and it will fail. So that might cause you some issues. We know from experience that this type of refactoring is hard to do when you already have customers live, so try to think about it ahead of time. And one simple way of, one way of doing it is to extract some of your the common objects into some libraries, and then you can have offers that are specific per country. It's just one approach. There can be other ways for you to consider this, but take it into account before going live and starting to have too many customers. Another recommendation that we have is to enable Azure Application Insights. You've seen it also in many presentations here. We're heavily investing on this to provide you a lot of information. So you'll have to create your App Insights resource in Azure, and then you can specify it as the Application Insights connection string in the JSON of your extension. And this has many, many benefits for you. You can get data on your features. You can get errors when you're after your app goes live. You have also now AI insights into this. You can also use it to dive into the results of your AppSource submissions, which we'll discuss a bit later on. And there are many other cases there. Just showing you one of the many Power BI reports that you've seen in other presentations. Now showing you the offer listings from them in AppSource. We have many reports that you can install. They have all the right queries for you, nice visualization, so it should be pretty easy to get started. The other thing that we'll ask you to do when you go to AppSource is to be mindful of how you're handling your secrets, if you're using API keys or anything else. Azure Key Vault is great for that. Do not keep plain text secrets. That's not something we would recommend because it can have some potential security risks. In order to enable the usage of Key Vaults, you'll have to first push your app to AppSource, and then you'll have to go through some registration process that is documented here. And then we'll validate that you actually own the key vaults that you would like to register for your app, and after that you'll be able to resubmit using your key vaults set in the key vault URL properties. So you can have multiple key vaults set there. And once you're done with that, we have some code units that you can use in the system app and base app to make it easy for you. The next thing that you might want to do on your app is to also enable monetization. So we have here an example from one of our example apps on the AppSource marketplace. And you can see that it has different plans. Those plans can have different payment plans, so monthly or annually. You can have some users, different prices. Some of those plans can be private to some specific customers. Some are public and available to everyone. So many functionalities there. So this is currently like a new feature. It's in public preview. It allows you to allows your customer to purchase the app through different plans, and it supports currently credit card payments. So how do you enable this? You would go back to Partner Center. Instead of saying no, as we did earlier, you'll have now to say yes, that you would like to sell through Microsoft. And as soon as you've done this, you get a new plan, a new plan overview tab that appears on the left side here. And you can select create a new plan, and now you'll be prompted to select a plan ID and also a plan name, which will surface in the AppSource marketplace. Once you've done this, you'll notice that you have to specify markets again. As soon as you opt in into this transaction mode through plans, the list of the countries that you're targeting for with your offer becomes the list of all the different countries targeting by all your different plans. So this is how it will be defined. It will ignore what you have said previously as the list of country. And then you have many options that you can configure regarding the pricing model, whether you want your plans to be public, private, with free trial or not, and many other things. If you go back to the plan overview, then you'll be able to see your plan and to see your service ID. You can copy that one and move it to VS Code, and that's where you'll be referencing it in AL through entitlement. So you can have here an entitlement object. You have here the reference to the plan ID from Partner Center, and then you can start assigning permissions to your entitlement. And there was also a great demo that was done earlier in the What's New in AL that shows you a bit more how you're going to leverage this in your extension. But for this, we have also great documentation, so we advise you to have a look there, and we can also try to join the preview at ak.ms/bcpublic-review. There are other considerations before you go to AppSource, so test your apps. I think you've been told this a lot over time. You need to have automated tests to make sure you have high quality and you don't have any regressions there. Think about performance. When you're going to AppSource, you'll have many customers. You'll be running in SaaS, and performance there is critical. You'll have also to take into account some scenarios such as throttling. You might be getting 4 to 9 errors for sending too many requests, so you have to be able to handle them gracefully in your app, so think about that. You'll have to consider what kind of public API you're exposing in your extension. Do you want your objects to be public, internal? What do you want to expose to other apps? How can they leverage this to complement, add value to your solution? And finally, how will you upgrade existing customer? Especially in the case where you started with a PT and you're going to AppSource, you might want to have an upgrade path for them to move from the PT to the AppSource app. Now, you're in a state where you know what to do in Partner Center. You know some of the requirements and the changes that you have to do in your AL app. I think we're ready to go through the submission process in Partner Center. So let's have a look at this. This is how it will look like once you've done all your setup. You'll be able to go to this review and publish action, and then you can just submit it. Later on, you'll get this view, that shows you all the different stages your submission has to go through. The first stage that we'll have a look at is this automated application validation. This is the stage where we're running the technical validation of your app. This is a fully automated process that is running within a few minutes. And we're using this to make sure that your app is meeting the standards for the AppSource marketplace. It's relying a lot on the AppSource scope, so we're really advising you to enable it in your development pipelines. We're also making sure that your app is compatible for all the different targeted country and releases that you have specified. So as an example, if you're targeting Belgium and Netherlands for version 21.0, so in that case you would have set application to 21.0 in your apps, then we will validate all the combination of all these apps. And that means that there can be a lot of validation run. If we do the combination of all the different releases, countries, and apps in your submission, there can be a lot of them. This is why we also recommend you to use Azure Application Insights, because we will be logging some signals for you when validating each of these different combinations of country and releases, and that will allow you to have more insights into what is going on for your submission. When you have first submitted your app and now go with another submission, we'll also be validating for breaking changes, and more specifically unannounced one, where you didn't obsolete your objects ahead of time. And this will be run on the latest release that is being validated. So if you're using App Insights, you might be able to see this pattern if you have some errors with breaking changes. Once you're done with the technical validation, the submission process will keep on, and you'll have now a preview deployed. And you'll be asked to sign off on that preview. There's one thing to take into account here. We currently only support the preview of the listing in the AppSource marketplace, meaning that you'll see your app with all your marketing materials there. You can review them, correct them if needed, but you won't be able to install the app in customer environments yet. So the current approach for that is to deploy it on sandboxes of selected customers, and here are some high-level steps on how to do it. So we'll remind you again, check your resource exposure policy. There is a dedicated field now to decide whether you want them to apply on dev extensions or not. And then you'll have to get access to the sandbox environments of your customer and then deploy your extension from Visual Studio Code. An important note is that once you've published your app on the customer environments, when you're going back to AppSource, to Partner Center to publish your app in AppSource, you'll have to change the version number because we currently do not support having the two of them, like apps deployed from VS Code and from AppSource with the same identity and same version. But don't worry, currently we're working on supporting to have preview out of the box, so at some point in the future you won't have to worry too much about this anymore, and it should be much simpler. Once you've done through this and you're satisfied with how your offer listing looks like, you might just press Go Live, and then the marketing validation will start. As the name mentioned, with manual validation on this stage, this is validation that is done manually. It can take up to 2 business days, but generally is processed faster than that. So this ensures that your offer is attractive for customers and for your prospects. It ensures that your listing meets the requirement for the marketplace. It's checking for trademark and copyrighted materials, checks that your offer description is in line with your metadata, everything that we've discussed a bit earlier. And once this is done the first time, it might not be performed every time. So if you're resubmitting your app, new version of your app, but you do not change the marketing materials, it will be skipped automatically. For instance, if you just change the version number and publish a new version of your app, it will be ignored. If you change your screenshots, your offer description, it will be validated manually again. And then the last stage we'd like to talk about here is this one, publish application with the service, and that's when the app actually becomes available for Business Central. And once you've gone through all of those, this is how it should look like in Partner Center. You should have a nice green line where all the stages have been validated. And at this point, congratulations, your app is on AppSource and you're ready to get some customers. We know from experience that it's not always a success on the first attempt, and there might be some failures and some errors on the way. So we'll see how we can avoid those. And we focus particularly on the technical validation, since we know that this is a common source of errors. So we're asking you for this, please review the requirements before trying to go to AppSource. There is a lot of documentation there on what you'll have to do with your apps. There are also some scripts that you can run from nav container helper repo, so all the BC container helper functionalities for Docker images there. There is also some functionality out of ALGO for GitHub. We're also asking you, whenever you get an error, have a look at the FAQ that we've built. It's available at ak.ms/tech-validation-FAQ, and it contains a lot of information that we've gathered over time based on all the support cases we had and feedback from AppSource publisher, and it's really a great place to get started. We'll also remind you that we have now documentation on all the different compiler diagnostics and code analyzer diagnostics online with some good examples and how to fix those diagnostics, the reason for them, especially for AppSource Corp. Have a look at the documentation online to understand what is going on with your app. And for more advanced scenario, if you're using application insights, we have made available a TSG as a Jupyter notebook. You can download this one into Visual Studio Code, install an app for Jupyter notebooks, and then by just specifying your connection string into that notebook, you'll be able to execute automatically some queries, and you'll get an overview of what is going on with your submission. So let's have a look at some common technical validation errors in case you're facing them. So those are some numbers that we got from the last 30 days when the slide was created. And we can see different categories. Breaking change validation, that's something that comes pretty often. So what are breaking changes? They're usually changes that are not breaking your app, but are depending the other apps that depend on your app. And if such changes are done, it usually impacts your customers, and they won't be able to upgrade, they won't be able to do copy of their environments, point-in-time restores. It might be pretty annoying for them. So there are different types of breaking changes, compilation breaking changes, so your change breaks the compilation of another app. For instance, if you've removed something. Those ones can be done as long as you obsolete things ahead of time and wait for long enough for dependent apps to be updated. Similarly, you can have runtime breaking changes, for instance, if you're adding or removing var modifiers, if you're increasing the length of a field. And then you also have schema breaking changes, and those ones are currently not supported, and they are all the changes that impact your table extensions, or anything that has a SQL schema in general. Let's have a quick example here of one of them. If you have a table and you decide to improve it by changing the type of a field, but also renaming it, for instance, here changing a year into a date, that won't be allowed, and you will get an error when going to AppSource. So not something you can do. The recommendation instead of this would be to set the field as obsolete pending, provide also an obsolete reason that gives information for dependent apps on how to fix it and what is the new alternative. Introduce your change as an addition there. You also need to keep in mind that this field, even if obsoleted, might still be used by other apps, so you need to keep on inserting the values there to make sure you're not breaking them on their runtime behavior. And then later on, you can decide to mark it as obsolete removed, and there we would ask you to be also mindful of the timeline in which you're doing that to make sure that your dependent apps have time to be upgraded. Another type of errors that you might commonly see is, is related to the app.json and the offer not being consistent. So you would usually get an error that looks like this one. In general, you should check that they're in line. Pretty often, on first submissions, we see that the publisher name or the name of the extensions are not matching. Later on, it is more often that you forgot to update the version number in the offer description when you're publishing a new version of your app. So that's something to take into account when you're publishing a new version. We're also seeing pretty often errors related to code signing. So the app is not signed or has been signed using your own certificates. So if your app is not signed, then you have to sign it. As mentioned earlier, we have documentation for that. If the other case that we see a lot is that the app is signed, but the certificate that was used was not trusted. It means you use your own certificate, and then you need to use one that has its roots in Microsoft Windows, and for that you can purchase it from a trusted certificate provider. You can verify on your own before going to the marketplace if the signature on your file is correct, and you can do this by just taking a any computer that you have with Business Central installed. And you can then go on the app file, check the properties, you have the digital signatures, you can see the details there, and you have the ability to see the certificate, whether it's allowed or not. In this case, there's a nice red cross that shows that the signature was not trusted. The other thing that you might get is related to missing affixes. At this point, we presented what affixes are, and you must register them. If you see such an error, it means that you haven't registered them yet, or you're not using the right publisher name. So in those cases, you should either reach out to d365vi@microsoft.com to register your affixes, or double-check your publisher name in your extension. The other thing that we've seen pretty often, and that was not covered in those numbers, are apps that are not compatible with all the countries or all the releases targeted in the submission. And for this, you would get errors where some objects are not resolved, some missing pages, some missing tables, and so on. We've seen an example before. If you have an extension that depends on objects that are specific to Canada, you cannot go to Belgium, and then you have different approaches there. You can either only target the countries that you're actually compatible with. You can decide to remove reference to all the country-specific objects, or you can consider to have duplicated offers with duplicated code. There are different ways around it. We're also seeing issues where your app is now not compatible with all Business Central releases, and for that, what can often happen is that you're trying to use the latest features for Business Central while targeting older versions that do not have those features. So you can either update the application property to actually match what you're required to use, or you can remove the references to those new features to be compatible with older releases. So with all of this in mind, you should be able to get to AppSource, publish some apps for your customers, and as time goes, you probably get more and more customers. But the thing is that the more customers you have, the more likely you'll be to have customers that are on an older version of Business Central than the current one. And this can be for many reasons. Their environment might have a PT that cannot upgrade. And that means also that some of those customers might end up running on older version of your AppSource app than the latest. And you know then that the older the version of your AppSource app is, the more likely it is to not be compatible with newer Business Central releases. And the question comes, like, how can you then release a fix for those customers that are on old versions if you're not able to go through the validation? And this is something that we have fixed with the latest release of Business Central. And we have now support for hotfixing older versions of Business Central there. So let's have a look at how the scenario is. We were in October 2022. You decided to go to AppSource. You published there an app that is compatible with Business Central version 21. And then a few months later, you decide to go with another version of your app that is now compatible only with version 22 because you had some technical issue making it compatible with both. That can happen. Now, you're finding an issue in your app that is targeting Business Central version 21. And you need to publish a fix for it. But you know it's not compatible with version 22. So what we did in order to avoid this issue is that when you're submitting a version of an app, we are looking if there is a next version to it. If there is one, we will take the version of Business Central that it's targeting, in this case version 22, and we will use this as the maximum release of Business Central against which your app will be validated. So in this case, we'll validate this version 1.5 from 21.0 included to 22.0 included, and then your app is good to go through the validation and will be uploaded to your customer. As part of the technical validation, we mentioned that we're checking for breaking changes to make sure that your customer can smoothly upgrade from one version to another. And we discussed that we have breaking change validation with the previous version of your app. But since you're now pushing version in the middle of other ones, we also introduce validation for breaking changes with the next version of your app. This means that the type of changes you're doing there is more limited. So what you can do is change your business logic. You can introduce new local procedures. You can introduce internal objects. But you cannot add new public objects that are not in the next version. And you cannot add new tables, new table fields, again, unless they are in version 2.0 as well here. Another thing to take into account when you do a hotfix, so publishing a version that is not the latest version of your app, you should not change the app version in your offer description, because we want you to keep the latest version stated there, so that when customers go to the AppSource marketplace, they see what is the latest version of your app and not what was the last version you pushed into the AppSource marketplace. So we've went now through a lot of this and how to do those validation manually. There are also a lot of things we ask you to consider, automated testing, and so on. And it might be a lot to take, but we have a solution to help you manage all of that. And this is ALGO for GitHub, so that's a solution that we have for CI/CD pipelines on GitHub repository. You can create your own from a template that is available at aka.ms/ALGO AppSource. And once you've uploaded your app and gone through some configuration steps, you'll be able to get access to many useful automated workflows that are there for you. Among those, you'll be able to get continuous validations on your pull request. You'll get the ability to deploy to your testing environment. You will also be able to deploy to Partner Center automatically and deliver it to AppSource. So a lot of good things there and a lot more to come. So check out the presentation tomorrow at 11 in room 5, and you'll get more information on this. So as a conclusion, we've seen how you can bring your app to AppSource, what kind of consideration you can have when you're bringing your app there. Going to AppSource will expand your customer base, give you more opportunities, and will also make you think about how your app is designed and make sure that you'll be able to scale with that. And we hope that with this presentation, you know how to get there. If you're facing any issues in the process of going to AppSource, we have different support channels depending on each of the scenarios. Of course, if you're using the wrong one, we'll redirect you to the correct one. But if you want to have your queries answered in the best delays, you should try to get it right from the start. And with this, we're concluding this presentation. So if you have a few questions, yeah? I have a couple of questions. Yeah.
Sorry for my English. Okay.
Yeah.
The possibility to have the offer for contact me.
Yes.
You cannot download the same app.
So you cannot download it from the AppSource marketplace. The customers there will not be able to just click one button and have it installed.
So why this? Because if a customer contact me, then I cannot give him the app.
So there are ways to do it. You can have a look at the documentation. There are ways to install the app into the environment. It's just for them, they cannot do it directly from the marketplace. But you can set up ways with them to do this.
Okay, so I can make them download, or I can install the app, the registered app without let them download it directly.
So they'll be able to do it themselves. So they have to go to you, then you'll provide them with the steps. This is documented for the publisher side, and then they can get the application installed. And as a note on this, this is not replacing the monetization and licensing, so you also still have to build this on your own, of course.
Okay. Second question is regarding the hotfix part. So are you telling me that I can push my customers or to download a new version of my
So what we presented here was about making the version available in AppSource. So currently, we're not automatically pushing your new versions to customer environments. We're only doing this as part of the upgrade of the environment to the next major. They will have to go to the AppSource marketplace.
So are you assuring me that on every major release, you push the update of my app to all the tenants? All the tenants?
Yeah, when they upgrade to the next major version of Business Central, we'll upgrade all their AppSource apps to the latest version at the time of upgrade.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yep, we can.
Hello? Okay.
Hey.
So a quick question about the shared libraries, because for example, most of the times we have in our offerings, you have like a core extension that has a lot of interfaces and base functionality, and then we could have dependent extensions that could be just for integrating with different third-party providers. How does that actually work when we're trying to upload this to AppSource? Is that shared library isolated between the two offerings, or is there's like a mismatch? How does that work?
So, from the Business Central point of view, your offer contains some extensions, and as soon as they become available in Business Central, they can be reused by other offers, with the assumption, of course, that you're using the same app ID for your library across your different offers. This is what defines the identity of an app, and any library that is available to Business Central then can be referenced by another offer of yours, or potentially another offer from another publisher that decided to make his business rely on top of yours. So as soon as you upload it and it gets to Business Central into AppSource, you can just reuse it from any offer that you have.
And that's valid even though that is not my main app, because of course I would upload it as a dependent shared library when we're uploading to AppSource, so that also gets registered and can be reused.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be the main app. So any of the apps that you have included in your submission, whether it's the main app that has its offer on its own or one of the libraries for it, those one can be reused from another offer. They don't need to have their own offer on their own listing on the marketplace to be reused. So yeah, hope that answers the question. Are there some other ones? There was one here.
About the monetization with the entitlements, will Microsoft apply a fee for every transaction or a commission?
This is a good question. I think Stefan knows. 3%? Okay, it's 3%.
3%. Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, we had another question on the other side. I can do the transfer.
Okay, we have some changes to one of our customers, and they want a field customer name with the length text 100. And after a month, they said, but we don't want to be customer name, we want to be source name in value entries. Can we change only the name, not the type of the field?
No, so that won't be blocked. That's a schema breaking change. You're renaming a field. So we won't allow you to do this in AppSource. We'll have check that are preventing you from doing so. So you'll have to introduce a new field with the new...
Yes, so we change only the caption.
You can change the caption. It might be a bit misleading for other apps that are depending on it now because the field contains different value than what it claims, but that could be seen as a workaround. But including another field for it might also be a good solution there.
Okay.
Any other questions? I don't see any hands up anymore. So thank you everyone for listening to this presentation. And